I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. This is week 3 of our 2022 horror movies theme month. Mm-hmm. And tonight was my selection, and I took both a cop-out and not a cop-out by just defaulting to a 30th anniversary movie. So almost a continuation of anniversary movie theme month. Mm-hmm. And we went with the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. Nominated for 4 Oscars, won 3.
Oh, wow.
Quite the cast with Gary Oldman as Dracula, Wynona Ryder as Mina Murray, Anthony Hopkins as Professor Abraham Van Helsing, Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker, Carrie is it Ewes?
Elways.
Is Lord Arthur Holmwood. You have Sadie Frost as Lucy Westerna. Tom Waits is R.M. Renfield. You have Monica Bellucci as Dracula's bride. Monica Bellucci is she's been in quite a bit of a few things, Bellucci. But yeah. You also have Michaela Burku and Florina Kendrick also as Dracula's brides, and various other members of the cast.
And Richard E. Grant as the Dr. Suitor of Lucy. Yeah. Billy Campbell was the cowboy one.
Yeah, so this movie follows the story of the centuries-old vampire Count Dracula. He comes to England to seduce his barrister John Harker's fiancée, Mina Murray, and inflict havoc in the foreign land. This was directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
Making it Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
And that's the Francis Ford Coppola thing, is he likes to put the title of the author of when he's adapting a well-known property, like Mario Puzo's The Godfather or John Grisham's The Rainmaker. It's kind of a trademark of his.
Yeah. He's a director that Nate likes quite a bit.
Yeah, he's one of the greats.
Yep. And this is my 3rd or 4th time seeing this. I can't recall for sure.
But you had it on DVD?
Yes.
Why did you have it on DVD?
Because I've seen it a few times.
Oh, okay.
First time I saw it was in the later 90s, probably 98, I believe.
In what form did you see it?
A home video at a friend's house.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe it might have been on DVD. It was around the same time I saw Matrix for the first time.
Okay, yeah.
So, and then I've seen it at least once in the early aughts, if not a couple times, which would have been probably when I bought it. Mm. So, but this was your first time seeing this film?
It was my first time seeing it.
So, Nate, first reactions?
This was something. This was good.
Yeah.
It took me a little bit to get into it. It's very highly stylized. I made the crack to you that this is the most red I'd seen in a movie since the previous week when we saw Dario Argento's Suspiria in the theater, which could be its own episode, but won't be. It's good. It's surprised me how good it was. There's kind of 2 spheres of acting going on, or it has the reputation. You've got Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins on the one end, very skilled actors given, strong performances. And then on the other end, you've got Keanu Reeves' notoriously bad performance. He underplays everything.
Well, and we'll get into this when we get to the trivia, but Keanu Reeves kind of regretted taking this role. And Francis Ford Coppola has been quoted as having kind of regretted casting Keanu Reeves in that role.
I had heard that Wynona Ryder was bad as well, but I thought she was pretty good. She was okay. She wasn't great, but she wasn't awful.
Yeah.
It really... The thing that won me over about this as it progressed is this is a new take. This is a new take on an old story. And I understand that there's...
But it also pays enough homage.
Yeah, it takes there's a lot of little homages throughout, like the Blue Fire and some other things.
Well, even the name Jonathan Harker.
Mm. Yeah. Well, Jonathan Harker is used in other versions.
Yes.
But I've never seen a version of Dracula that looks like this before. I mean, visually, it's all over the place. It's very crowded. And then I liked how they incorporated different aspects from the book that usually are left out, like Lucy's 3 suitors. And teaming them up with Van Helsing, and I think Anthony Hopkins might be my favorite Van Helsing. I just like that the take he has on it, and how he's a very logical man of science, but he quickly accepts it's a vampire. So I accept it, and I'm gonna figure out a way to deal with it. But I thought those four that the Lucy storyline was fresh. The romance aspect, that's something new that has been imposed on this. That's not from the Bram Stoker book, or at least that's my understanding. It was different. A lot of these versions are kind of repetitive. And this broke free of that. It also broke free of other constraints in terms of the sexual content of the film, which is pretty extreme and makes me wonder why you were watching it in 1998, Rob.
I was introduced to it by some high school friends. What do you think we watched it?
Indeed. Yeah. When he's at the castle, and Harker is, and he's looking around where he shouldn't be, and he stumbles onto that other bedroom. I wanted him to say to Dracula when he showed up, "Hey, your bed's a lot nicer than mine."
Flashing forward again slightly to the trivia, they consulted some magicians to figure out how to shoot that shot. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I mean, I was impressed, and I impressed in a way I didn't anticipate being.
Well, and Francis Ford Coppola is kind of he's not limited by the time when he started directing, but at the same time, he takes some of those traditions with him. So, for example, most of the effects in this are practical effects. Yeah,
that's one of the great things about this. Might be one of the last great practical effects movies.
Yeah, do you know what the only non-practical effect in this was?
Is it the fire?
Yeah, the blue fire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what the blue fire is about?
It's supposed to mark where treasures are.
Yeah, because there's this whole kind of folk magic, scrying kind of aspect to the Dracula story, which is just left out because it's so foreign. Yep. So it's left out of other adaptations, and how do you work it in? And so that was a little Easter egg, and there was a number of little kind of homages.
Well, so you've talked about how so much of this was new and fresh to you, and I kind of appreciated the parts that I felt like were homages to the original. In fact, not the original, but other versions of this, mm-hmm. like Nosferatu and Nosferatu the Vampire. In particular, when Keanu Reeves' Jonathan Harker first arrives at the castle, that first room he kind of goes into, I felt was pretty reminiscent of some of the earlier versions. There was a few things, and even the name, I thought it was interesting that they referred to the vampires as Nosferatus and things of that nature. I appreciated some of the homages to earlier versions and things of that nature. So it was interesting to me that you caught the other side of that. So,
or even homages to Vlad the Impaler, and how they are looking at the text, and you see a reproduction of a pretty famous image of Vlad, and you see the people impaled on the stakes. And I thought that was interesting, that conversation he's having with Van Helsing late in the film, where he's talking about, I was this great defender of Christianity, and I was betrayed, and Van Helsing's like, you butchered people on stakes, which I just thought was a neat way of working in references to history, or references to other versions of the story. Gary Oldman certainly puts a different take on classic lines, like Children of the Night, what sweet music they make.
And there's another line, there's actually a line, again, we'll get to it in the trivia, that is part of the reason he decided to take this role, was to deliver one particular line.
Oh, fun.
But I thought Gary Oldman's performance was quite strong in this.
Yeah. I was just looking up. So this is 1992. Wynona Ryder turned 21 in 1992. Her love interests are Keanu Reeves, who I believe was a few years older than her, and then Gary Oldman, who was born in 1958. So he would be 13 years older than her. And it feels like there's a bigger age difference than that between the two of them. That's just something I noticed.
Yeah. The age difference between Ryder and Reeves is 7 years.
Oh, 7 years. That's also bigger than I would have anticipated.
Yeah. Yeah, you made reference to Dracula's Bride and how they introduced some of the over-sexualization to this. That was interesting. Like you said, it was new.
The references to the baby sacrifices.
Yeah,
that's also new.
Yeah,
or new and old.
Well, and when Lucy takes the baby down into the crypt, apparently no one informed the child actor that there would be more than one take.
Oh,
so that became problematic. Apparently, Wynona Ryder and Gary Oldman did not get along on set, which was a surprise because I guess they got along really well when they were rehearsing for the film.
Oh, really?
And then something happened which has never been revealed.
Yeah.
So
they got a good chemistry.
For most of the film, it kind of, there was a couple scenes towards the end of the movie where it felt a little bit forced, but for the most part, I thought it worked quite well.
I thought the chemistry between her and Keanu Reeves kind of started out on the wrong foot. Like when they're having that conversation before he goes down to Romania, she almost seems disinterested in him for a bit, which actually kind of works in the final product because she's very torn. You know, she's a woman of her time and she wants to be loyal to a good man who loves her and that she loves, but it's like this whole other world that Gary Oldman keeps Harker trapped down there in the Carpathians, and then he goes up to his new properties, including Carfax Abbey, and because one of the reasons, like he'd already made the arrangements to go up there, but he sees the picture of Wynona Ryder that Keanu Reeves has with him, and it's like, oh, that is the reincarnation or the spitting image of my bride from the prequel stuff back in the 16th, 15th century. Goes up there, and when he arranges a meet cute for them to bump into each other, and she's just like not into it, and then he kind of like guilts her like by over apologizing. And she kind of lied a little bit to him, saying she was married when she wasn't married yet. And then she feels bad, and it's like, okay, I'll take you to this very early moving pictures that he said he was trying to find where that was. But the time they spend together...
Which the pictures they were showing were...
They weren't quite 1897. But she introduces her to something she didn't know she wanted. A certain level of excitement and this different world. And, of course, when she finds out that this is the man responsible for her friend Lucy's death, she's very upset, and then within moments is like, and I freaking love you anyway. So they really play up that aspect of it, the way Lucy's torn, or not Lucy's torn, but the way Mina's torn.
Well, and she has those flashbacks, too.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder what happens after. Does she stay with Jonathan Harker?
That's the impression I got because, you know, she's got the burn on her forehead from the communion wafer or whatever that was. But as Dracula is dying after he's been beheaded, that disappears from her forehead. You actually see that go up in smoke. And the other effects that she was feeling all go away. So the impression I took from that was that she reverts to the state before Dracula came and got her.
Yeah, but I don't think... the memories would stay, and I feel like Harker would always have this sense of being second place. I mean, it's not a good performance from Keanu Reeves. I mean, what is that accent? It's very half-A.
Who knows?
But they present him as an extremely honorable man. I would say more so than he's presented in the other versions. Like Harker's like an okay guy in most of the versions. Here he's like actually a very admirable guy. Though hard to phase at the beginning because every weird thing he sees at Dracula's castle, he's just like, yeah, whatever. Can you sign this, Count?
Yeah, pretty much up until that shaving scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's up until he sees... It's the guy crawling down the wall like a freaking spider. And another thing I liked about this is how it's not just him turning into a bat. I mean, it turns into pretty impressive Carpenter-esque... No, that's not what I'm looking for. But the monster he turns into is freaking... The bat creature is pretty impressive. But he can also turn into smoke. He can turn into a bunch of rats. So he's got more power. So this book does go back to Dracula and kind of flesh out... a lot of the cosmology. In fact, I think the only thing that I recognize that they got wrong is here Dracula can go out in the daylight, but he didn't sparkle. And we all know that's a very important part of the vampire mythos, and I can't believe they left that out.
Back to the part that will remain in the edit. One thing that surprised me about this movie, what would you guess its budget at?
His budget was $40 million.
Oh, you
because I looked at it.
Yeah. I was surprised. I thought it would have had a higher budget than that. Mm-hmm. Especially considering some of the effects that they did.
Yeah.
I mean, the sets that they built so they didn't, so they could do practical effects.
And it was a big success, which is what Coppola needed it to be, because his company was on hard times, because the 80s was not a great time for Coppola. 70s was, 80s wasn't. And so right around 1990-ish, she's like, well, I got to make money making properties. I'm going to make another Godfather movie and make Dracula. I'm going to adapt a John Grisham novel. I'm going to get my company back on a good financial footing, and he succeeded in doing so.
Well, I guess I will jump. I wasn't going to get to the box office returns. I just was surprised by the budget. But as long as you're alluding to it, might as well give the numbers. So, as I mentioned, an estimated budget of $40 million, an opening weekend of over $30 million.
Wow.
A domestic gross of $82.5 million, and a worldwide gross of $215.8 million.
Yeah. And it's still bringing in the money.
Yeah. You ready for some trivia?
Yeah.
Actually, before we do that, it's 4 Oscar nominations. Again, it won 3 of the 4, so the one that it was nominated for but did not win was Best Art Direction Set Decoration. It won the Oscar for Best Costume Design, which is understandable. Best Effects, Sound Effects Editing, and Best Makeup.
Oh. Though, as elaborate as the makeup is in this movie, they couldn't make Keanu Reeves have convincing gray hair.
Yeah, and did you catch how often his hair color kept changing?
Towards the end it did. It started getting whiter and whiter.
Well, and then it went straight back to black.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah.
Editing mistake.
I couldn't tell if it was a mistake or if it was on purpose, because they both kind of revert.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Could have been.
Producer and director Francis Ford Coppola. This is coming from the trivia section of IMDb.
Shocker.
Something new for me. Producer and director Francis Ford Coppola explains on the DVD commentary that Mina and Harker's wedding was a reshoot done at a Los Angeles Greek Orthodox church. They filmed the entire ceremony with a genuine Romanian Orthodox minister, and realized afterwards that Wynona Ryder and Keanu Reeves may have really been married to each other, not in any legal sense, but under the eyes of God, as Ryder claims. Reeves has since confessed that he often gets text messages from Ryder that read, "Hello, husband," and that they are both completely fine with it.
That's funny. I'm glad that they're so friendly.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most famous story about this film.
Gary Oldman hired a singing coach to help him lower his voice by an octave to help him give Dracula a more sinister quality. And it's quite effective.
Tom Waits could have helped him.
Yeah.
He was there. Speaking of which, when are they going to bring back cage helmets?
When Mina, played by Wynona Ryder, recalls her previous life as Elizabeta, she says she remembers a land beyond a great forest. Quote, "Land beyond the forest," end quote, is the literal meaning of Transylvania.
Oh.
Producer and director Francis Ford Coppola says on the DVD audio commentary that during the shaving scenes, the walls of the set gradually move inward to create a subliminal growing sense of claustrophobia.
A close shave.
There you go. The little girl who played the child carried into the crypt by Lucy was genuinely terrified of Sadie Frost in her vampire makeup, and obviously wasn't expecting to do more than one take. Producer and director Francis Ford Coppola and Sadie had to do a lot of sweet talking to the child in order to get her back in Sadie's arms for another go at the scene. Gary Oldman said that when he first read the script, he decided it would be worth doing the movie just so he could feel what it would be like to say, quote, "I've crossed oceans of time to find you," end quote, to someone. And Francis Ford Coppola and his special effects team consulted with a professional magician to achieve the effect of Dracula's brides rising up from the bed. It was an effective shot.
Yeah, it was.
Gary Oldman was drunk the night they filmed the scene where he had to lick blood from Keanu Reeves' straight razor. The scene was filmed after midnight, which added to the spirit of the scene and helped put the cast in the proper mood. The scene of Lucy, played by Sadie Frost, getting back into her coffin in the underground crypt was shot in reverse to give it an eerie quality. an effect that would be used in a number of movies that came after this. Francis Ford Coppola has openly criticized his own reasoning for casting Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. According to Coppola, he needed a young, hot star that would connect with the female filmgoers. Keanu Reeves said years after this movie came out that he wasn't happy with his work in it, stating he had been exhausted from making several movies right on the heels of signing on as Jonathan Harker, and that he tried to raise his energy for the role, but, quote, but I just didn't have anything left to give, end quote. The blue flames on the road to the castle. In the novel, it is explained that on one night every year, blue flames are seen over areas containing hidden treasures. In the scene from the novel, Harker's coach driver stops several times to place rocks over them as markers in order to find them in the daytime and possibly dig up the treasure. The blue flame is the only optical effect in this movie. Every other effect was achieved completely in camera on the set with no post-production effects work.
This would include that scene with the train going over Harker's journal. That would be a special feature in DVD that might be worth seeing.
Producer Francis Ford Coppola had Richard E. Grant, Cary Elwes, and Billy Campbell embark on a series of adventures, including horseback riding, hot air ballooning, to build the camaraderie between the three. And it shows.
Yeah. That might be my favorite add-on to this movie, is those three characters and the time they spend with Van Helsing.
Coppola notes on the DVD commentary that although the three actresses playing Dracula's bride had agreed to appear nude in this movie, everybody on the set was too timid to ask them to take their clothes off before filming their scenes. Coppola told his son Roman to ask them, but Roman didn't want to do it either and asked another crew member to do it. Alternate casting for Van Helsing in this movie.
Oh, okay.
Any guesses? Liam Neeson.
Yeah, he keeps showing up in alternate casting on stuff. Often inappropriately.
Liam Neeson was considered for and very much wanted the role of Professor Van Helsing. But after Sir Anthony Hopkins, still writing the success of Silence of the Lambs, showed interest in the role, Neeson was ultimately turned down.
I'm glad that happened.
At one point during filming, a double was used to portray the wolf beast version of Dracula because Gary Oldman suffered an allergic reaction to the makeup. Sadie Frost didn't bother auditioning for the part of Lucy, as she figured she was too physically similar to Wynona Ryder. It was only after Coppola had real trouble casting the part and happened to see Frost's performance in Dark Obsession from 1989 that she was approached.
Sadie Frost didn't have much of a career. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head she was in, but I did learn that she was married to Jude Law.
Oh, yeah? You alluded to this, but earnings from this movie were enough to save Zoetrope, which was Coppola's studio, from bankruptcy after suffering from financial difficulties and liabilities of $27 million over the past 3 years. Steve Buscemi was the first choice to play Renfield, but turned it down.
It's too obvious.
Coppola wanted Johnny Depp to play Jonathan Harker, but the studio wanted someone who was more of a mainstream heartthrob. I have a feeling they may have regretted that one. That's all I'm going to share out of the trivia. Nate, how would you rate this movie?
I was going to ask you to rate it first.
I would give this... I'm torn between 7 and 8 stars on the 10-star scale. This is 3.5 on the 4-star scale, so probably an 8 out of 10. It's a solid film. It's a little bit long in my opinion. You could probably trim 10 to 20 minutes out of this. This is a little over 2 hours. It's 2 hours and 8 minutes. But it maintains a good pace. There's only a few places where it felt a little long.
I'm going to go slightly below you. I'm going to give this film 3 and 7. That's because I did feel like it took a little while to get going. And I don't know how I would feel about this film in a rewatch.
What do you mean?
I just wonder if the novelty is kind of what it has going for it, and that like the showiness of it obscures, there's not a ton of substance to it.
I would be curious how you would like this on a rewatch then. So my impression of this in the 90s was that I was impressed with it, but I was a teenage boy, so that wouldn't have been difficult. My first viewing sometime in the early aughts, early to mid-aughts, I remember not being quite as impressed. However, tonight I enjoyed it again.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious how it would hold up for you on repeat viewing.
But it is visually sumptuous, and it varies from form in some interesting and engaging ways. It's got 2.5 strong performances. It's worth seeing. I'm glad I finally saw it.
Yeah. Was there any reason you hadn't seen it? Just
I don't know. Because when it came out and the content that it had, I wasn't going to be watching something like this in 1992.
Yeah.
And I just never got around to it.
I was kind of the main reason. So I had forgotten that this was Coppola. I didn't pay attention to directors in the 90s. And so I'd kind of forgotten until tonight that this was a Francis Ford Coppola. But in hindsight, knowing that it was done by Coppola, I was kind of surprised that you hadn't made your way around to it. So this has an aggregate rating on IMDb of 7.4 stars and a Metacritic rating of 57. So it got some mixed reviews when it first came out.
Those are generally strong reviews.
Most of the mainstream reviewers gave it good ratings.
There's a 77% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah. Any other closing thoughts on this one?
I think I've said what I have to say.
Okay. A 30th anniversary, and actually, so interesting note, its release date was not until November 1992.
They missed it.
Yeah.
They missed the obvious.
So we are just a few weeks shy of its actual 30th anniversary. This episode will be live, and some of you will be listening to this before its actual 30th anniversary. But yeah, I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. How was your holiday sprite?
No. It's like I forgot it was holiday sprite, so it's like I'm reassessing the taste. It's pretty good. Spiced cranberry. Gotta pay attention to the taste.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
You ready for this?
Yeah. I lost my train of thought.
New take. It's a new take on an old story.
I lost it. It's gone. We're going to have to rewind.
Okay. My wife made some comment earlier tonight when I told her this is what we were watching, about this being like the Dracula movie that sexualizes stuff. And I was like, well, yeah, because Twilight and the Underworld movies didn't sexualize vampires.
This came first.
Well, I know. But, yeah. Well, I think she said something about it being the only one.
Oh,
and I was like, yeah, because Underworld and Twilight didn't. She's like, well, Twilight doesn't have... This is going to get edited out. She's like, Twilight doesn't have any sex. And I was like, you're telling me it's not a romance? And she's like, well... like, okay. How do you know that they're not in the hospitals?
I had this thought that came to me during the very heavily made-up periods at the beginning for Gary Oldman. And he was getting real close to Keanu Reeves and invading his personal space. And I'm like, Biden's second term.
Wow.
You get one Biden joke. This is where you say, I finished the trivia.
Now I will be done. Oh, wait. I just saw Steve Buscemi's name. Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep going with whatever you wanted to do.
No, I don't have anything. I was trying to steer a transition.
Oh, I was going to pull up Sadie Frost.
Yeah,
Sky
nothing.
Captain. Oh, that was as a producer.
There's basically nothing.
She's still acting in Bird Flew In this year, or last year.
Quant in 2021. But yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing any standout titles.
I almost wonder if she's not kind of regional actress. Like some of these looked like foreign titles. Yeah, definitely more obscure stuff. What was the last thing you watched with Monica Bellucci in it?
Twin Peaks: The Return?
Mine was Under Suspicion from 2000, which I watched sometime in the last 2 years, but yeah.
From what I know of Miss Bellucci's career, I don't think Roman Coppola would have had to been too shy to make that request.